Hi, my name is Lisandra. You may call me Litsu. This is Litsu Roleplays. This is my personal YouTube channel and this is gonna be my first video. The reason why I'm starting this is in order to share all my personal thoughts and use this medium as a confessionary for all my thoughts regarding RPGs, game design, fantasy settings, sci-fi, and everything that relates to my taste. I became relatively famous around the internet because of some projects that I made specifically for old school essentials, and it's in regards to Dark Sun, one of my favorite settings of all time in regards to D&D and ever. I have to point out, and I decided to make a couple of years ago one conversion that thankfully became widely successful. To this day, I have people that really like that system that I made, that little project that I undertook with no other reason that just I just wanted to do it, right? And for these reasons, I decided to make this first video, one dedicated to that exact setting, Dark Sun. The way that this video is gonna work is that I'm gonna flip through this handbook right here. This is the first version of the print on demand box set, the one from 1991, and I'm gonna scroll to the book. It's gonna be very improvised. It's gonna be very unscripted in that sense. However, I would like to point out as I scroll through the pages of this box set that I've read in and out for almost 7 years at this point, in order to share all my thoughts and personal opinions that I have about the setting. Dark Sun is a setting that I've been reading in and out twice, almost every source book. The only thing that I may not have read at least more than once are the novels from the Prison Pentats. But in any case, it is a very personal setting that is very related to my persona and who I am as a person, mostly because of the time that I've been spending with it. And again, I'm talking about years of personal time dedicated to playing, designing, and just immersing myself in this setting, and of course its community. Now, if I open this book, now something to understand about the print on demand right before we start, right? The quality is quite good, I gotta say. This one cost me around $32. I bought it like a roughly 2 or 3 years ago, and still it's in a very prime condition. If you have the opportunity of buying a print on demand copy from ttrpg, I fully recommend it. For some reason, they do a very good job, at least most of the time. I had the rule cyclopedia as well, and they didn't do that well of a job. But in any case, let's begin, shall we? Now, if I open the book right here, it's gonna go directly into the rules book. Personally, the original box set, it includes what you could consider almost everything that you will need to run Dark Sun, except for a couple details, right? It lacks a certain proper introduction to the setting, even though it exists technically in the Wanderer's Journal, which we're gonna go into. However, when you open the book and start right on the rules book, you're gonna see first we got the index, all right, all good, and then we go onto the chapter 1, and it literally says every Dark Sun character has the same 6 ability score. It's like you're jumping right into action, and I find it interesting because it assumes that you are already familiarized with both the game and the setting. Well, it kind of makes sense in that way. This was 1991. Second edition came out, if I'm not mistaken, around 1989. So this is 2 years into the edition, right? But as soon as we read, we get some optional methods in order to create characters. This is done because you are playing in a very little setting. Athos is a very little place. You're in fact starting at third level. At third level, and you have roughly, if I'm not mistaken, 5 methods, and none of them are using 3d6 or 4d6 even. I'm talking about 5d4. They're assuming that you're gonna get at least a couple 20s at the most, right? Which is, if you play second edition, is huge. We're talking about an edition in which if you get 18, you then get to roll an extra D100 in order to get force on top of the max strength that you can get, right? which is absolutely insane. But nonetheless, you get to read as you flip through the book. First, you get all these awesome rules about the new races. Why? Because again, Atlas is a very different place in which all races are flipped. From what I understand, the idea is that they wanted to have this sort of battle tactic system. It's called battle system, oddly enough, and they wanted to have a dedicated world to it. And along the way during development, the focus just switched, in which the designer simply said, okay, how about we make an RPG setting out of it? And they just decided to flip everything of the assumptions that we had for roughly 20 years, or no, sorry, 15 years in the fantasy RPG world, right? Or at least D&D. And they simply said, okay, how about we have elves who are not magical, but they are kleptomaniacs? How about we make halflings cannibals? How about the world is just destroyed? And then they started to add psionics and all that. They wanted to have like this sort of metal, planetary romance, Conan the Barbarian, super pulpy world that is in a constant decay, because they also wanted to have like this ecological kind of environmentalist message about the abuses of power, which is, again, if you grew up around the 90s, it was probably very, very popular with Captain Planet and the like. Again, this setting predated me for around 7 years. I was born in 98. I don't think I was even sperm by the time. But in that case, I can relate at least to some level to the mindset that some of the designers had, because they really wanted to subvert, which is a nasty word nowadays, but they really wanted to subvert certain tropes within D&D. Nonetheless, let's continue. So we got racial ability adjustments. That's all nice. Dwarves, elves, half-elf, half-giants, a new race that they introduced. Mule, Tri-King. What the hell is that? Apparently they killed off most of the other races. Kobolds, goblins, orcs. They do not exist. They just wanted to do their own thing. Even though it was kind of, I wouldn't say it was idiotic. If you wanted to be unique, being unique is one thing. But another one is to replace certain races with roughly the same thing. Just to give you an example, right here in the cover we got something that was identified as static. However, if I bring it closer to you and you realize exactly how it looks, you would say, okay, this is an orc. No, they're not orcs. They are a different race. Oh, what happened to orcs then? Oh, they died. All of them. Genocide. It wasn't explained in this box set though, but part of the setting is that they were the cleansing wars. Nonetheless, for this time, because the setting wasn't fleshed out, many of the explanations of what happened, of why the world became like this, were very nebulous. So in that sense, the existence or the absence of traditional fantasy races was not something that was needed to be explained. That is something that came out later during the development of the setting. And in that sense, just the fact that there were no orcs, you simply didn't question why there are none. Pretty much, you just said, oh no, orcs didn't exist in Atlas. They did not exist, right? But in any case, they start to describe all the races, right? Elves are velocists. They just like to run. They steal a lot. They have this weird mix of hippie plus raiders culture. They make sure that they feel very alien. Not going to lie. And for what it's worth, at the time, I could see that elves were seen as this kind of noble race, very ancient, very reminiscent of Tolkien, right? This is about the time where fantasy started to experiment a little bit more with what you could do with races and all that. This is why second edition is one of my favorite editions. They just push the boundaries of what you can do with fantasy, or at least medieval fantasy. But in this case, this is one of the first subversions that I think is pretty interesting. The elves, instead of being this noble race or noble decadent race that lived for hundreds of years and are very good with magic, in this case, they're just raiders, velocists that are sort of feel like a mix of gypsies, Romani, plus a mix of steppe culture. They're very nomadic in that sense. Then we move towards the other races. The half-elves, sadly the half-elves are just the same thing. They're just the same thing as the others were. They are disgusted by humans because they are too elvish, and they are disgusted by elves because they are too human. Well, it is what it is. We got the dwarves. The dwarves became super kleptomaniacs. No, sorry, kleptomaniacs are not. They have an extreme case of ADHD on a collective basis. They have something called the focus, and it's not properly explained until you get the monster compendium. But it explains that once a dwarf dies, without accomplishing a goal that they have in life called a focus. Whenever you make a dwarf, you gotta have a focus, whether it's protecting your friends, whether it's running a tavern, whether it's whatever goal you might think of as a person, right? If they don't accomplish that, or they fail in that quest, they become a banshee. A banshee that just starts going around killing everybody in order to hunt the living because their lives were not complete. And it's interesting how they have that racial level OCD to the point that they have to hunt the living if they don't do what they have to in life or what they set out to do. They're also bald. I think that's the biggest subversion of them all. They're bald, no hair anywhere. But in any case, then you got the half giants. Half giants is a very interesting one. They were made to be this sort of brutish, personal brutish giants. It's right on the name. But it's implied that they are a sort of magical construct for a bygone era, similar to what changelings were in the original D&D, or what chimeras are, or what owlbears are. In this case, they are made to be these perfectly super strong, brutish servants, to be personal thoughts. And the idea was that they're not very intelligent, but it's not that they're not intelligent. It's more along the lines of they have not that great of strength of will, meaning that even if you make a half giant, you only get one half of the alignment, and then you start to modify it according to how other people around you acted. So if there are a lot of chaotic people on the party, then the half giants start to imitate that behavior and become more chaotic, and vice versa, right? But halflings, don't get me all over on halflings. Halflings they kill my little boys. They went to Frodo to go. They even killed Gollum. They just went full psycho on it. Halflings live beyond the central civilized lands of the setting. They live on jungles, and they are known to be cannibals. Apparently, and this is before they start to explain the backstory, apparently in this setting, halflings are the big precursors. A decision that is very weird. I don't mind it, but okay, halflings? Really? Do you really need it to be that different? But in that case, they are cannibals, they are savages, they apparently have this weird culture in which they see themselves as superior with their long oral tradition going back thousands and thousands of years. And they're just going over to the cities in order to perform a quest, or just getting involved, of being very, very curious about the world around them. Then they just explore, and outside of the jungles, everything is a shithole, it's a desert, right? It's fun to play elves. I do suggest that you guys play one at least once if you're playing on Dark Sun. Humans are, again, the predominant race. They don't change that much. The one thing that they explain later is that apparently during the Cleansing Wars, a super powerful being known as Rajat, he is not human. He's from an ancient race, like the true elves of the setting, like a Valar in that sense, who went psycho and went on a genocidal rampage in order to fix the world, using humans as their weapons. Because of course, if there's something that humans are always going to be, is to be totally warlike, racist locusts. We're just meant to maim, kill, and be the orcs of our own universe. It's fun to be human, though. I love being human. But in that sense, they are just a regular trope. They are the inhabitants of the city. They are the majority of the population. They dominate every aspect of culture. You're gonna find them almost anywhere. Even though that trope became a little bit more subverted with the following books, especially when they go out of the Tablelands or the main region of Athos. But in this case, humans do not change that much. The only thing that they probably added is to add some flavor, like, okay, they can have brown skin, or they can have weird mutations like Elvis ears and all that, and which kind of like diversifies, not in a bad way. It just adds more to the human character than what we can find in a real world. What's the difference between a human and an elf in that sense? Well, that's just a blur line, like it always is in D&D. But in this sense, now we got another race, which is very interesting. The mule. The mule is very heavy metal. Ironically, because remember, Dark Zone is a metal poor setting. You're not gonna find many metal weapons in this place, but they're heavy metal. Mule are heavy metal. Why? Because they are the crossbreeds between a dwarf and a human, and it's kind of implied, at least early on, that this was not consensual. It was done by slave masters, and then they decided to mix, to have the strength and force of will of a human with the physical strength and resistance of a dwarf, and the result is the mule. It is implied that, again, it was done by slaves. Mule are always born as slaves, at least that's what is implied here, or at least the character as an individual, as a mule precisely, is to be raised under the stigma of slavery, because you were done to be the super brute, super powerful Ubermensch that can just work non-stop without drinking water for at least 2 days, right? That's heavy metal as fuck, I'm sorry. Playing a mule is super interesting because it's totally meant to be, the world is against you and you are super powerful, at least physically wise, and you have to, through your force of will. It's very Conan. I feel very Conan whenever I think of mules. And they're kind of like, again, they're kind of like taller dwarves. They're still bald. They don't have no hair. And they all look like they came out of the WWE. In fact, probably the strongest WWE fighter is the weakest of them all, of the mule. Now they have another race, the Tri-Green. Now the Tri-Green, if I'm not mistaken, they got introduced around the Forgotten Realms during the first edition. They were this sort of mantis-like race. But in this case, as mantis, they were made to be sort of like nomadic raiders, but they are like the alien race. They're total alien. They are insect people. In fact, they even draw it right here. This awesome illustration by John Baxa. Between Brom and Baxa, I love more Brom. His style is better, but Baxa is a close second. I would even go so far as to say that Baxa's style is more impactful to Dark Zone than Brom is. Brom was to attract people, but Baxa just made illustration for almost everything in almost all books. So I will point out that, hey, John Baxa, you're the GOAT. You're my GOAT. In this case, the Tri-Green are just mantis people. They don't sleep. They don't drink water. They even have their own source book, the Tri-Green of Atlas, where they explain all of their breeding practices, cultural practices, and all that. And they're just made to be... I just feel like I'm watching Animal Planet whenever I think of Tri-Green, in the good and the bad ways, because I can think of many ways that I can play a Tri-Green and have fun with it. However, the alienness of them is what makes them unique, and they don't have the same ethics of us. In fact, whenever you have a race that deliberately, whenever they breed, they leave a bunch of eggs and are made to eat each other in order to grow up, it's something that is very animal-like. It's something that you will find in the animal kingdom, but it's not something that we associate naturally with sentient creatures. But in this sense, the Tri-Green are awesome too. I love the Tri-Green, especially when you play as Scions. One thing about Scions, because we're going to talk about the races, and then we're probably going to stop. This is going to be a very long video. But in this case, the classes of Atlas, they are made to be a little bit different, naturally, while they add in new classes. Atlas is a very interesting world because it's just a constant spin of the usual tropes, right? But let's get it honest slowly, okay? Something to remember or to know about second edition is that technically there are only 4 classes, right? And these 4 classes have different subclasses that represent the archetype that we usually know about them. These are the warrior, the cleric, the rogues, and the wizards, right? Darkson has a 5th branch, which is the scions, which are like psychic mages. But the idea is that within the warrior archetype, you got the fighter, the regular fighter, plus the more archetypical or more advanced subclasses. Because if you remember in first edition, my apologies, you can play a fighter or you can play like a paladin or a ranger by going to super convoluted requirements, right? Probably not so much in second edition. They kind of like simplify the requirements a little bit, although you still needed like certain minimum stats and be a certain minimum of certain races, usually human, in order to play these classes. But in this case, the classes that are introduced here are one, the fighter. If you play D&D, you're always gonna have the fighter as an option. It's one staple. It's kind of like a wizard. It's very, very few the settings where you will have a wizard. Even though Darkson is the one that makes the wizards more different than anywhere else, right? You got the fighter. You got the ranger. Nice, a ranger in a survivalist kind of setting. That's fine. And the gladiator. The gladiator is interesting because again, we are talking about Bronze Age society. Darkson is a very Bronze Age-like society of god kings and slavery and city-states. And it's very reminiscent of that kind of ethics, the one that we could find, for example, in ancient Rome. Ancient Rome is a very bloodlust society, so they decided to introduce gladiators because it was awesome and it was heavy metal, right? Then we got the wizards. Wizards, man. We got 2. Well, we got a bunch, alright? Second edition introduced the concept of magical schools. It was not something that you could find in previous edition, in first edition, or BX or BECMI, if you're playing OSR, naturally. But the idea of you having the different schools of magic, abjuration, divination, necromancy, evocation, so forth and so forth, conjuration, and all that, that's something that was born out of second edition. And whenever you chose a mage, or you can either choose a regular wizard, a regular mage, or you could go for one of the branches. You usually have like a requirement of the stats of the school of magic that you can get, and you get like certain. You don't get bonuses. The only thing that it provides you is that it makes it easier for you to add certain spells or develop in that certain school of magic with those kinds of spells, right? And in this case, Darkson introduced a second variety, a second dynamic of whether or not you are a wizard. One of them is the Preservers, and the other one is the Defilers. And this is related directly to the way the magic system works. Defilers, they technically take, because the way that the setting works, Atlas works, is that they don't have anything regarding to the weave or any magical plane where to draw energy from, because they make a very obvious environmentalist metaphor with the whole state of the setting. In order for you to do or cast magic, you need to extract the energy from somewhere. And what they decided to do with Atlas is that you extract it from the planet itself. You start to consume the life of the plants or the soil around you, killing it in the process, in order to cast these super powerful effects. The effect, at least in second edition, is just you can cast it faster. Nothing much. A little bit disappointing, I will have to say. But in any case, you take the energy from the planet itself. You kill the soil. Nothing can grow on it. You kill all the plants. And if you're high enough level, you start to consume life itself. Anybody around you starts to feel bad and all that, or starts to lose hit points, and then you cast the magic. That's what a Defiler does. They are, of course, universally hated, except for the Ubermensch who are running the cities, who are the Sorcerer Kings. But in this case, becoming a Defiler is usually being a bad guy, or you just being a super complex character. And It's my favorite class, not gonna lie. I like to play morally complex characters. Or at least morally dubious characters. And then there are the Preservers. The Preservers are just like the green alternative. They still cast magic. The only difference is that they just grab just enough for the planet not to die. But in mechanics wise, it's just the same. It's just the same as a regular wizard. Preservers are the regular wizard. The Filers are wizards with the advantage of casting first. Not bad, at least when it comes to the mechanics of second edition, because combat is order of the phases of play. Like, hey, first comes movement, then comes range, then spell casting. Well, you're the Filer, you go first, right? And it is something that it might not seem like that. It might not seem like super determinate, at least at first, until you start to notice or you start to get familiarized more with the way the system works, or at least if you're familiarized with any TSR edition, right? In order for you to give an advantage to a class, this is an RPG principle. If you want to make the bad guys win, you have to give them a very good advantage against the good guys. If the good guys do the things by the books, the bad guys have to do it by advantage. And this is some with advantage. And in this case, the Filers are way more powerful than a Preserver. Why? Because they cast first. In any magical duel, your Preserver is going to lose, right? Unless they win on initiative, but that's another thing, right? But in this case, the reason why I'm saying this is that in many conversions that were made, or many later additions to the setting, like the 3rd edition, or the one in 4th edition, or almost every single one for 5th edition, they don't grasp the concept, or at least not that I can see mechanically, that the Filers have to be mechanically better than Preservers. The reason of why you will play a Preserver is because you want to be the good guy. And the message of Atas is, this is a setting where the bad guys won, and they get winning. And if you are a good guy, you are at a huge disadvantage, and you gotta have, it's an uphill battle, basically. So if you want to make a conversion of Dark Sun in any time, just remember this one principle. The filing has to be mechanically more advantageous than preserving. And the only reason why you decide to preserve instead of the file is morality. Simple as. Now we got the priest classes. Now, in the obsession of just being different, sometimes to the point of just being different for the sake of being different, they decided to kill the gods. Of course, the bad guys won. The gods are not gonna help you. But in this case, they simply replaced it instead with elemental powers. And, okay, this makes our clerics, which still exist, they just worship the elemental planes. They make them into sort of, I would say, some kind of shamans in a way. They're very animistic. They just worship the elements instead of deities. I don't dislike that choice, although I would at least give more emphasis of fake deities, or at least make the clerics a little bit more rare. And the reason why I say this is that as the longer you go reading Dark Sun booklets, the more you're gonna realize clerics are everywhere. Clerics should be something that you should find out in the wilderness, inside of some crazy grottos. But they are the druids. Spoilers, the druids are exactly that. The clerics are just like the local shamans, but they are accepted in the cities. In the cities, you should have no clerics. But in this case, the role of the Templar, here's the next class, introducing Dark Sun, and sadly taken in the revised edition. Templars are the true clerics, because they worship the Sorcerer Kings. The Sorcerer Kings are kind of like god deities. They are these super uber powerful mages that just became immortal. They don't explain why in the box set, but they're gonna explain it naturally in the following source books. But in this case, at least as they were pointed out, or at least as they were depicted here, the Templars are the servants of the Sorcerer Kings. They're enforcers. They're kind of like the police in the city. That are a mix of also of inquisitors and all that. I would prefer it for them to be more just the regular clerical order. They are the ones dealing with the religious ceremonies. They truly worship the sorcerer kings as gods, and some of them do, some of them don't. The mix between them it varies depending on the city, but it's the way that is depicted on practice in almost every adventure is that they understand that the kings are not divine, and for some reason everybody knows and understands that the gods do not exist. When in reality, if you're having a bronze age civilization, you should have thousands of gods and people believing in them, even though they might not exist. Instead, I usually find these references of people saying, "Oh, by the elements." I fully disagree with at least with that framing, but it's not the point, or at least not the purpose to just go on this rant about them. Just, just mind you, clerics they worship the elements, druids they worship nature spirits, and they have very deep mechanics regarding protected land. They protect the land directly, while the clerics only promote the elements. And the Templars, they just work within the apparatus of the governments of the cities, right? Which, sadly, despite the wide variety and diversity in regards to how law enforcement works in each city, there's literally not much else that you could add. Sadly, they didn't add much flavor to most Templars, which is a shame. It's a shame. I fully believe that Templars could be a very interesting class, right? Even though, at least from the very beginning, they were depicted as roughly just lawful evil at the very best, or lawful neutral at the very best, never lawful good. A shame, but anyway. Then we got the role classes. Now, the most interesting case is that, well, thief is the exact same. This is the exact same case as the fighter. You have a thief, you have a fighter. You have a fighter, you have a thief. Same thing. It's one of those classes that are never going to change, regardless of where they're put. But the one change that they decided to do is the bard. Now, well, apologies. I've been talking for almost 30 minutes. That's cool. Bards are assassins mixed with the bardic trope. They are meant to be this sort of theater people, performers. My apologies, performers. They play music, or they participate in plays, or they do spectacles, or they are performers usually hired in this mix of intrigue, kind of assassination plots, and the bards are like these super powerful harlequins that know everything about poisons, and while they are playing their lutes, they're just plotting the time for where you just look distracted, and they just boom throw a poison needle at you. It's a very interesting spin on it. Again, certainly different from the regular bard from the core edition. But in this case, I think they were a victim of the policies that TSR were going through at the time, because we used to have assassins in first edition, and sadly they were taken out because of the satanic panic. They decided to remove them from the core edition, even though they were, well, quietly pulled back in with following source books. But this was right before that, and in this case they just wanted the bards to feel the trope of the assassin, even though first they no longer can use magic, and they are basically assassins that know how to use instruments, right? An interesting spin on it, but it's a shame because it's not that unique. It's just assassin with extra steps, at least in my opinion. Nonetheless, something that if you are gonna make another tip, if you're gonna make another conversion of Dark Zone, at least for any future editions, either the new 5e or whatever you decide, remove magic from the bard, because that's not the concept of what the bard is. The bard is an assassin, and neither make it just full an assassin. Try to at least bring it close to what a bard is. Let it believe, have inspiration and all that. Just modify the class in such a way that, hey, you have a blend of both. And then the psionesis. Now, the psionesis is... okay, I have my story with the psionesis. What's my story? Well, the psionesis kind of sucks. Don't get me started that, okay, yeah, no, it's super cool. No, I play an psionesis for 30 years. No, sorry, the psionesis sucks. It is the sad truth. That's why I decided to make a whole different psionesis, at least principle-wise or design-wise, from my OAC conversion, right? Why? Because, well, and this is a big failure of the box set, and that is my biggest criticism of it. Why? The box set didn't include this book. This is the Complete Psionist Handbook, which includes information of how to build a psionesis, plus all its powers and devotions. I'm sorry, it is unacceptable that I have to buy this just to play a class. And it costed around $15 US, which, if I'm not mistaken, if I don't do my calculus right, it should be like around 20 to 20 something dollars in today's box. If I buy this box set for, if I'm not mistaken, do they have the price here? I don't think they have the price here. I think it used to go for like 50 or 60 bucks. I'm sorry, I will have to find that information later. But in this case, you have to buy something on top of it, and they assume that you already have the second edition books on you, and that is sadly what frustrates me the most. Is that they require me. It's kind of like having a DLC. You know, you're playing a game, you're having fun on it, and then you go to one of the routes available on you in the game that they say, oh no, you gotta buy the DLC in order to have this content. That's exactly what they did with the Psionicist. They force you to buy a different book instead of including the class right there and then so you can play it. And it sucks. It absolutely sucks. Why does it suck? Well, it becomes clear once you read this book. Because as soon as you read this book, well, first it has a lot of explanations just to explain why magic and psionic powers and psionics are different from one another. They are functionally the same. It said that psionics is just more like mental powers in the sense that they just modify the way that your body works and create illusions, right? Which is something that you could perfectly do with magic. But in this case, the way that it works, the class preparation is totally botched. You have like 2 tiers of powers, devotions and sciences, and then they have like this weird mix of psionic combats in which you have to like engage in combat before applying the power and then win, and a whole grid that modifies how much your check is gonna be modified depending on the mode that you choose. It's a mess, and then they give you like the base score, because apparently they use the pawn buy system in the sense that you have a certain pool of mana or psionic or inherent potential that they give you, and from that the powers just cost a certain amount of powers that you get to spend, and you're basically now playing like an accountant, playing arithmetics about, oh, this power is 6, okay, I gotta subtract it because if I have 54, now I got 48, oh no, this power costs 3, now I have 45, and now you're just playing arithmetics, when it's something that it should not be that hard. It should not be that hard. There are better ways to do this. But in any case, they just suffer from one of the biggest sins of second edition, in which they just make mechanics that could be so easy to do or so intuitive to use, and they just make it totally hard to understand and read. And by the way, this is not a very easy book to read. You gotta read a lot just to infer the main idea of what you're reading. Just to give you an example, I'm just gonna scroll this. It's gonna scroll. Okay, adrenaline control. By controlling the production and release of adrenaline in his system, the psionicist can give himself temporary physical boost on demand. When he increases his adrenaline, he gets... I'm sorry, I already read like 20 words, and I already dizzy. I may be too stupid. I might be too lazy. But I think powers have to be easy to understand by a 5th-year-old. This is not not a 5-year-old, but at least a 5th grader. And this is certainly not something that a 5th grader will enjoy, except for the absolute weirdos that are super nerdy, like I used to be, and I still am, but it's made to be easy, man. It's made to be easy, and this is not easy. Well, I think this has been going long enough. Sadly, I haven't been I wasn't able to cover until this 22nd page, and I still have a long way to go. So I think this is gonna be a series now. Nonetheless, I hope this was entertaining. When I created the Dark Zone conversions, it took me, if I'm not mistaken, it was around 6 months where I was working constantly on them, either looking for new information, new material, and new mechanics that I just like from anywhere that I've played, just to make the setting something that I would like to run. Thankfully, people have been showing that support, and I do really enjoy the support that I've been given, and the fact that people play it. I love when people play the stuff that I make, which is why I'm so critical, or at least I'm making these confessions, because sadly, Dark Zone is not a perfect setting by any means. It has many flaws. Every time that I post in the community, I usually like to discuss these kind of things, because I think that potential is there, but we need to, at least as a community, this is a call for the overall Dark Zone fandom, to please keep working on the projects that you do, but make sure that the first one rule for any RPG module or any RPG sourcebook conversion or project, it needs to be intuitive, it needs to be clear in the way that it communicates the rules, and it needs to be made to be used at a table. That's the one gold standard. Whatever you do as an RPG designer, it needs to be with the sole purpose of being used at a table, with everything that entails. Anyways, thank you for watching this video. I know that this has been a pretty long one, and I know it's not that recommended for any starting channel to just go at it, but I'm just gonna keep experimenting with it. This was certainly a fun talk. I've been roughly talking non-stop for 40 minutes. But if you've seen to this point, I thank you for watching. Subscribe if you are interested in seeing more contents like this. And if you would like to support me, I'm gonna leave my HOI and all my projects on drive-thru down in the description below, so you can get them if you like. All my Appendix L and all my conversions, either Dark Zone or Spelljammer. And well, we'll stay tuned. I'll keep posting about it. I'll keep working on my source books. Please stay tuned for my next projects. I'll see you the next time.